Everything works. Here we are. We're live.
Hi, Mel. How are you?
Melissa Stoller, it's so great to see you. Welcome to You've Got Mel. You know
Thank
what
you.
we do?
I know you do the jingle, Mel. Thank
Yeah,
you.
exactly. So, jingle Mels. Okay, if I call you Mel by accident, you can correct me.
I love that connection. I hadn't even thought about it till you just said it, but you can definitely call me Mel and I'll call you Mel. Why not? I love it.
Mel meets Mel and You've Got Mel. Yeah, just don't call me Melissa, that's all.
I love it. And I love your jingle. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I think I could sell the jingle. People wait all day for it.
It's catchy. I really like it. And I'm really happy to be here.
I'm delighted that you're here. I lost my jingle. Now you can see all the crazy stuff I have.
Get a chair, grab a seat, we'll sweep you off your feet. We move, we groove.
Here we are.
Ease your legs, rest a while. All you gotta do is smile. We're swell, can't you tell? Got Mel. When the show begins, you better hold on real tight, or before you know it, you'll be high as a kite. Take a break, settle down. We're the only show in town. SRO, don't you know? You got Mel. Give it up, don't think twice. We're a hurricane on ice. What the hell? Give a yell, ring your bell, show and tell. Mademoiselle, give a smell. You got Mel.
You've got Mel.
Get a check.
Once is enough. And Mel has Mel. That is to say, Melissa Stoller. Okay, I'm stopping share now, so people won't see all my garbage on my computer, but they did already. So, Melissa, it's wonderful to have you. I'm always delighted to host children book writers. So, how did that happen, and start at the beginning?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Mel. I love your show and I'm really happy to be here. So, okay, the beginning, let's start at the beginning. I come from a family of storytellers, and that's probably the most important thing. And that's probably the biggest inspiration for me becoming a storyteller. My grandmother, Jessie, my Nana, told amazing stories about her life growing up in New York City in the early 1900s. And she, no matter how many times I heard the story, I would basically say, Nana, tell it again, again and again. I just love them. And they were full of adventure and surprise and, elements of New York City architecture and the streets and the people and just all kinds of things going on. So I really like to hear her stories. And then my parents also told me amazing stories. We lived on Long Island. I grew up on Long Island, and my parents are both from New York City. And we lived on the water in a town called Merrick. And my parents made up these elaborate stories of all these characters, birds and squirrels and ducks. And someday I have to write that story because I just haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to do it. But I really
hold on. You're getting ahead of me here. Ahead of me. So your Nana, where did she grow up in New York?
She grew up on Dyckman Street. I think she was born in Brooklyn, but then when she was married, she lived on Dyckman Street, which is near the Cloisters. I don't know if you've been to the Cloisters, but it's a beautiful part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art that features medieval art. So my mom actually grew up in in her apartment right across the street from the Cloisters. And my mom is actually a great storyteller too.
Your grandmother grew up across from the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art?
From a branch of it called the Cloisters, which is north in, I'm trying to think of exactly where, it's like northern Manhattan, at the northernmost tip of Manhattan.
So you weren't on the Lower East Side or something?
No, I think my grandmother was born in Brooklyn, and then her family at some point moved to very tip top of Manhattan.
So we should be publishing her stories also.
Well, we did, and I'm happy to talk about it whenever you want. One of my first book actually is called The Enchanted Snow Globe Collection, Return to Coney Island, and it's a chapter book. It's a time travel adventure chapter book, and I have a picture of my grandparents in the book because this is a story that my grandmother told me so many times, and I always loved it. It was about how she went to Coney Island all the time. Coney Island is, for those who don't know, it's an amusement park and a beach at in Brooklyn, at the lower tip of New York City, the borough of Manhattan. So my Nana went to Coney Island all the time with her family and her sisters. And on one occasion, she met a handsome stranger on a trolley. And in those days, I think you talked to strangers and he wasn't giving her any attention. So she opened peanuts. They used to sell peanuts on the trolley in those days. And she cracked open the peanuts and she threw the shells on his lap. She was very brazen in those days. And he responded and they started talking. And she asked if he would come to her home for dinner with her family. And he said, no, I don't have a proper shirt. I don't have the right clothes. And she said, oh, you can borrow my father's shirt. And that's what you did in those days. So he said, okay. And he got dressed at her home and they got married 6 months later. And they were married, for a very long time. So I love that story. And I wrote about it in Return to Coney Island. And I put a picture of my grandparents in the back. And the story is basically, here's a picture you can see. So that's kind of a nice picture from the 20s. You can see the 1920s costumes, outfits. And the story is about 9-year-old twins who go to their grandmother's house for a sleepover in New York City. I use New York City a lot as a character in my stories. And they go on the sleepover and they shake a snow globe from her big collection. And they're immediately transported back in time to 1928 Coney Island. And they realize soon that they're meeting their great-grandmother, Jessie, and they realize they have to help her meet this handsome stranger on the trolley, otherwise they won't be born. So I was inspired by
the handsome stranger is Jack.
The handsome stranger is Jack, exactly.
A Jewish boy?
Yeah, they're Jewish in the story, right? I'm Jewish, and I'll tell you.
No, because she threw the peanuts on the lap of a stranger.
Yeah.
His name might have been Jack Sullivan.
Yeah, no, that's true. It happens to be that their real last name was Mandel.
Okay.
Yeah. So
there's nothing wrong with it, but back in the day,
it could have been anybody, because Brooklyn and New York City, as we know, was a huge melting pot. So it could have been anybody. But in this case, it was Jack Mandel.
Okay. And now we're going to fast forward to you.
Okay. So, and I just want to tell you one thing about that book is that I used my love of collecting. I collect snow globes, and this one is from Coney Island. So I needed a way for the twins in the book to get back in time, and I decided that they would shake the snow globe and get back in time. So I always tell kids when I'm doing school visits to use something in your own life to prompt you to write. Like in my life, it was a collection that I had and my grandparents' stories and photos that really helped me put the story together. It's
also a good tip for people starting out in the adventure to write children's books.
Exactly.
And I want to get your best tips for writing while I have you on the show.
Fantastic.
Okay, so you grew up in Stony Brook,
a town called Merrick on Long Island.
Not Stony Brook, Long Island. Long Island, I would think of Stony Brook.
Yeah, no, I like Stony Brook. That's a nice town.
But it's not close to Merrick.
It's not far, about 40 minutes or so.
That's the part of Long Island that I like.
Mm-hmm. Really pretty, very pretty.
Yeah, and very suburban.
Yes, and we grew up near the beach, so my whole life was basically spent at the beach. I could. It was a long ride, but I could ride my bicycle to the beach. But basically, my summers were spent on the water, either on a boat or at the beach with my family and friends. So it was a lovely childhood of nice and fun adventures.
What? No trauma, no angst?
I mean, everyone has trauma and angst for sure. But I could say that I had a very nice childhood. I did. My father was a lawyer. My mom is a retired. My father passed away when I was 18. So that there was some trauma and angst there. But until then, it was very happy and wonderful. And my mom lives across the street from me in New York City, which is wonderful. And she's my first and best editor. And she loves to read all my manuscripts, which is amazing. And she's a retired school teacher. So my house was always filled with either like legal discussions from my dad or teaching discussions from my mom. It was like we had a lot of books. We had a lot of discussions. We went to museums. We went to concerts. Like they love to instill culture in my family. And I have a younger brother.
I love your mom already.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
Can you tell her? Can you phone her to come over?
I wish I could. Not during. You know what? We're being so careful during pandemic times. We meet outside.
I forgot that you have COVID in New York too.
I know.
I thought just in Israel.
But you know what? I'll tell you one thing about my mom. She came after my oldest daughter's bat mitzvah in 2009. We brought the whole mishpacha, the whole family, to Israel. My mom came with us and my in-laws, and we had the most amazing time. So I've been to Israel 3 times, and next time I visit, I'm going to visit you, Mel, for sure.
Absolutely. And likewise when I come to New York, but probably I'm going to visit your mother first.
She would love it. She would
Yeah,
love it.
because I tell her that there's another person who writes, whose name is also Mel, who also loves critiques from people's mums.
Why not? Why not? And she's
Okay,
a volunteer at the Central Park Zoo, so I think a lot of my stories also have animals in them because I love animals, as you know, probably from my family loving animals.
she's a volunteer at the Central Park Zoo,
Yeah, yeah, they
as
have
as in Madagascar.
pretty much, pretty much. Yeah,
I have to meet her.
100%.
I'll buy her peanuts.
She would love it because it's her parents. Her parents are Jesse and Jack, so she would have a lot
Exactly.
to talk to you about. And
Wow.
I named my middle daughter Jessie after my grandmother, so you can meet the whole group.
No, ask your mom if she wants to be on my show. Let's. Okay, so we're going to discover your 5-year-old trauma soon. But before, because this is my theory.
I know.
If you write for 5-year-olds, you're stuck at 5. You're not forthcoming. So continue. As a schoolgirl, Melissa.
Okay. So, right, as a schoolgirl, I loved writing. I had a diary. I wrote letters. I wrote postcards to people. I had a lot of pen pals growing up. I had pen pals in all different countries, and I actually met a pen pal from Sweden. I had pen pals in France, England, but I met a few of them on my travels, which was great. So I really always loved writing, and I became. I decided to become a lawyer, probably because my father was a lawyer, so I knew about that. But I really liked researching, writing, analyzing. I loved studying law. I actually met my husband in law school, so that was exciting. That was great.
Did he throw peanuts at you?
He didn't, but we met in the library of the law school. So it was a good romantic, similar kind of story. It's a good story. So I liked law school. I liked studying law. I worked for a large law firm for a couple of years, and then I taught in 2 different law schools in the legal writing program of those law schools. And I was a career counselor in a law school, and I helped students in law school figure out their career paths. And what I realized that I loved most about the law was the research, the writing, the analysis, and the communication. So when my first daughter was born, she's 24 now, I left my job and I stayed home with her, and I decided to try writing children's books. So
Wow.
this was a long time ago. I joined SCWI, the Society for Children's Book Writers.
One second. We're just gonna, because you started talking about your brother.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry that I have to remind you, but
we're moving back. Yeah, no, I was just saying I have my brother I'm very close to. He's 7 years younger than I am. And we got into just a lot of adventures, a lot of fun times, a lot of family fun times that hopefully I instill a lot of that fun and curiosity and wonder. I think I was always a curious kid. I liked like flipping rocks over and finding salamanders or frogs or snakes. I really wouldn't like that now, but as a kid, I like that. Now I would run. But as a kid, I enjoyed and I was curious about a lot of things. And I just always liked being outdoors and exploring. So I think I put a lot of that into my writing.
And you loved your legal career, and you just stopped cold when your daughter was born.
I stopped, but I pushed it in a different direction. So I got into writing parenting articles. I wrote for a lot of local publications about parenting, about children's health. I did a lot of book reviews, movie reviews, show reviews. I talked about traveling like with children and traveling with family. So I did a lot of writing, and I did a lot of editing for a few New York City centric books.
So you were blogging before there were blogs.
I was doing some blogging, but mostly, right. I was mostly writing, print articles. And I really liked that. And it was something I could do at home. I have 3 children, I have 3 daughters. So I could do all this writing work at home while I was raising and growing my family. So that was really fantastic and worked really well for me. But I just I always like to tell people, I started trying to write for children 24 years ago. I joined SCBWI. My card says that I joined in 1997. I mean, it sounds so long ago. And I had so many rejections at the beginning. Like I had, and this was, before you could even just press send on email. I used to just mail, the stories in with return postcards. And I have so many of those postcards. I kept a lot of them just to kind of remind me of the beginning. But I always tell people, and I especially tell students when I'm doing school visits, it's a long process. You know, writing is a long process, but many things that you're trying to do that are worthwhile, that you really believe in, could take a long time. And I like to tell that to students, to remind them, like, you can pursue your dreams. And even you could pursue one dream like I did of being a lawyer, and then that dream could morph and change into something else, like being a writer. So I like to tell people, especially kids, that life is fluid and not always linear, and like, pursue your dreams, even if they're different dreams along the way. And it might take a long time. And it took me a long time.
People who are watching but aren't in the children's writing business. So SCBWI stands for?
The Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. So if you go to scbwi.org, it's an amazing, amazing resource for writers and illustrators. And they hold conferences, usually in person, although this year in the main one will be online. But it's, you know what, a silver lining to everything being online now is that people from all over the world can attend from home. So it gives a lot of more people access to these amazing conferences. They have conferences, each state often hosts their conferences. I volunteer with them in New York to co-chair the writing, like, it's a writing group where we meet several times during a week or several times during a month, and we go to a coffee shop and we write, and we just set a timer and we write for 20 minutes, and then we talk about the industry for 20 minutes, and then we write again, and we do that for 2 hours several times a month. And there's just lots of opportunities with that group to find critique groups, which are so important, to find your people. So I joined that group in 1997, and I got a lot of rejections, and I put that aside and I started writing for, you know, magazines about parenting. And then I co-wrote a book with a friend about organizing a parent-child book club. I'm still in a book club. Actually, I have my book club meeting tonight with my friends. This is our 21st year of our adult book club. So it's great. Mostly some people have come and go, but it's mostly the same core group. We meet once a month, and I started a kids book club with a friend with our children. And then we said, why not write a book about it? So we wrote a parenting resource book. And then over time, as my kids got older, I said, you know what, I'm not done with that dream of writing for kids. Like, I want to dust it off and bring it back out again. So I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago that I dusted it off. I had always gone to the SCBWI conferences and I kept up with them. I just hadn't been writing anymore. But I thought about what I wanted to write. And that's when I wrote Return to Coney Island. That was my first published book. And it's published by Clear Fork Publishing.
Okay, so one second. So hold on. Most people don't realize, because we're talking to all kinds of people, not all of them are writers,
Sure.
that you can do one of two things. You can, well, three of things. You can publish yourself, which is probably not advisable.
Mhm.
I've done it and it's not good. And then you can submit directly to publishers. And probably the best route is to find an agent who then goes to the big publishers and tries to interest them.
Right.
And when you're talking about being rejected, you're talking about being rejected from agents or from publishing houses?
From both. I pursued, you know, this dual line of sending to agents and sending to publishers, mostly the small publishers who accept unsolicited submissions where you don't need an agent. So I had rejections from everybody. And until finally in 2015, I guess I started back up again, you know, 2014. So in 2015, I actually submitted a story that's still not published. It was about a squirrel in Central Park. And I was submitting it to a wide range of publishers and agents. And I heard from a few different friends who had been published with Clear Fork Publishing that they accepted unsolicited submissions. So I didn't need an agent. And I sent them that squirrel story. And the editor, Callie Metler, wrote back and said, well, I forgot to say in my query letter, I said, I have a squirrel story. And I also have a time travel adventure story that I'm still working on. I just kind of threw it in there, which I didn't always, but I did on this case. And the editor wrote back to say, well, I'd like to see your squirrel story, but I'm really interested in your time travel adventure story. And she ended up buying the time travel adventure story, which was The Enchanted Snow Globe, and she didn't buy the squirrel story. So that's still sitting on my computer, and maybe someday.
You know, squirrels hibernate in the winter.
maybe it'll pop up again sometime and have new life.
It might. So
It-
these publishing houses, the Clear Fork and Blue Whale,
Mhm.
are small publishers in Texas.
Correct. Correct.
Um, do they pay advances? Do they market the book? Do they send them to bookstores? I'm really confused because I'm interviewing a lot of people,
Mhm.
and all of them are publishing with this small publisher, and I'm trying to figure out how it works.
Right.
Um, it's really much better than publishing yourself. Is it like publishing with a major publisher?
Well, I mean, nothing is quite like publishing with a major publisher because a major publisher is in a class of its own. But I have to say that Clear Fork has been amazing. It happens that I went to Texas for a conference in 2017, and I met Callie and I met Elaine, who's the editor of Blue Whale, Elaine K. Christian. And I met other people, Ellen Leventhal, who's been on your show and who kindly introduced us. And that was fantastic because I got to know them and I really got to understand
And I want to thank you, and then thank you, Vivian.
Yeah, Vivian,
Thank
of
you,
course.
Lydia. And
Yeah,
all of these people have published books in Blue Whale or Clear Fork.
I don't think Vivian has not, but she's an amazing cheerleader and um, I don't think she has, and she has a lot of amazing books coming out these few years. But Lydia, and I watched your interview with Lydia, and I watched your interview with Vivian, and they're dear friends also. So it was great. It was so great to meet these people in person. And I've actually met Vivian in person also because we spent a day in New York City at the Metropolitan Museum of Art with a few other writers. And I have to tell you before we, at some point,
It's wonderful.
how I was inspired to write Scarlets Magic paintbrush. I don't know if you want me to tell you that now, but it was through a trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is about 10 minutes from my apartment in New York City. I live in Manhattan, and I went to the Metropolitan Museum, which I go to quite often because I love it. It's like my favorite place in the world. And I was standing in front of a Monet painting, my favorite impressionist. And I just like out of the blue thought to myself, what if I had a magic paintbrush and I could paint like Monet? Like, wouldn't that be amazing? Because like, I've spent a lot of time in Paris and I love seeing all the impressionists and I just have always admired them. And then I thought, well, what if I had that magic paintbrush and then I lost it? Then what would happen? And that's how I wrote the story, Scarlet's Magic Paintbrush. And Sandy Sankey illustrated this. And I'll show you the first couple of pages. She's an amazing illustrator. And we're coming out with a sequel called Return of the Magic
Return,
Paintbrush.
yes, I saw.
The Return of the Magic Paintbrush. So that should be out in 2021. And I just love everything about this book. And it's just a story of creativity and girl power and finding your own voice and finding your own creativity. And also another theme is it doesn't have to be perfect. It can just be like your masterpiece. It can be your own creativity. Oh, and I love this picture where Scarlett's doing a headstand and the dog is doing a headstand. So Sandy put this dog throughout, which is a really cute secondary storyline. And Scarlett and the brush, were at odds a little bit at the end of this book because the brush wanted everything to be perfect and Scarlett wanted to do it her way. So in the second book, readers will see them, how they kind of come back together and they'll see their true enduring friendship. So that was fun. And I always like to tell students when I'm doing school visits, you can find ideas anywhere. I mean, I found this idea at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I found an idea for another picture book, Ready, Set, Gorilla, because I was standing in New York City and I think I was in Times Square. And
what happens in this book? What happens in this book, Melissa?
Sure. Well, this one's about a gorilla and he loves to race with his friends, but he likes to win at any cost. So instead of saying ready, set, go, he says ready, set, gorilla. And he kind of cheats. He's very cute, but he kind of cheats. Until a little friend comes along. I'll show you this is a really cute cute illustration by Sandy Steen Bartholomew of gorilla racing with penguin. And he totally cheats. He stuck out his foot and poor penguin, zoomed up into the air, but penguin's fine. Don't worry. And he alienates all his friends because he keeps cheating until his friends keep saying, no one's going to race with him anymore. Until I love this illustration, this super cute gopher. And I used a lot of wordplay with gorilla and gopher. This gopher comes to town and he says, you know, want to race? Sure do. Really? Let's go. And then gopher does, well, this is cute. Gopher, they start to race, and gopher, they crack their knuckles, and gopher does a little bit of cheating on his own. So the two of them are cheating until a cheetah comes to town. And then you kind of have to see what happens. The cheetah, you know, kind of beats them at their own game in a way. And you kind of have to see what happens. And it's a story about friendship.
As
and
long as
sportsmanship.
as long as the cheetah doesn't eat them at their own game.
No, the cheetah definitely doesn't eat. And at the end, you know, no
You
worries,
need a
because
sequel, Melissa. You need a sequel.
I'd like to maybe do a sequel, but at the end, they're all playing, you know, happily together with all the animals. They all come back and play happily together. So it's a good story about friendship and good sportsmanship and how to play fair with your friends and how to say you're sorry. Because you know what? It's really hard to say you're sorry for adults and for kids. So I think this is a good way to get kids into like knowing what's the value of saying you're sorry. So those are two. And then do you want to hear about my latest one?
Yeah, but before that, so you're publishing now with this publishing house.
Yeah.
And are you trying to find an agent?
Yes, I am trying to find an agent, and I send out so many queries. It takes so much time to send out queries, as we all know, just to do a lot of research on agents and to read their blogs and to go onto Twitter and follow them. And I go to a lot of conferences now all online. And I take a lot of classes. I'm really involved in the Children's Book Academy class, where I'm an assistant in the class, and I just participated in the Picture Book Palooza. I presented on writing from fiction. My presentation was like, we are all storytellers, and that was really fun and exciting. Mira Reisberg is the director of the Children's Book Academy, and she actually is also an editor and art director at Clear Fork Publishing. So she put me together with all these amazing illustrators. So that was fantastic. So yeah, I'm definitely looking for an agent though. And I think that's the next step in my career. It's the next logical step. So I'm sending out queries and I'm trying.
To find an agent and to publish with a big publisher.
Yeah, I think, you know, I would love to do that. Absolutely. So I'm trying.
Okay, so
it's a slow process, but I'm working it.
So that's it. And so I want to share with you what Julie Headland said on the show.
I watched some of her interview. It was fantastic. And I'm in 12 by 12. I'm in that group, as you know, also, and it's fantastic.
I left 12 by 12 because my goal is not to write more stories, it's to write less stories.
Okay.
I write many more stories than one a month. So that's, I love Julie, but that's not one club
Okay.
I need.
Okay.
I need like, you know, the only 12 by 12. But like you, you know, we're on a quest to be better writers, to have better craft, and you can only be as good as you can. And then you have to be one out of 1,000 or 10,000 lucky people who finds an agent at the moment that the agent is looking for something that you happen to have written.
Correct.
So I applaud you on this journey, but it is a Sisyphic journey. So now I want to take you back because you write for young children. What age group?
My picture books are usually 4 to 8, and then my chapter book is 6 to 9. So okay. Yeah.
So you know what I'm going to ask? I'm going to ask about my theory.
I do.
You know my theory.
I do, that there's that people have some kind of, you know, trauma, or they're kind of stuck at the age of 5, and that's they're writing for that self. So I understand your theory, and I think that can hold. I think that's a really good theory. I'll tell you, like, I'll just pivot a little bit from the theory and say you can write also, like, I feel like I'm writing for my 5 or 7 or 8-year-old self in an optimistic and happy way, because I think as authors, you're right in that we do write for ourselves in a lot of ways. Like, we write for the child that maybe we were at that time. Maybe we wanted to find a book about like, from, you know, a Jewish story, or a story that fits to our own heritage or culture, and maybe we didn't see that when we were growing up. Or maybe, you know, we loved animals, and we wanted to write a book about animals because we just loved that so much. Like, when I think back on some of the books I do realize that I liked as a child. Like, I'll give you some of my favorites, and I'll tell you some of my writing now corresponds. Like I loved From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Baisley, Frank Weiler. Like I read that story 100 times to myself and now to my kids. And I love the Metropolitan Museum, as I talked about. I wish I could do a sleepover in that museum, uh, like those kids. But I have done a sleepover like at least 4 times in the Museum of Natural History in New York City with my youngest daughter. So that was pretty close. And I wish I wrote the book Night at the Museum. Like that's a great one. But I loved books about adventure. I loved Make Way for Ducklings. I loved Are You My Mother? I loved anything by Judy Blume, anything by Beverly Cleary, the Nancy Drew books, The Secret Garden, you know, like those types of books. And I realized when I think back on it, those are types of stories that I like to write. So I think, you know, and I loved like TV shows, The Brady Bunch, The Partridge Family, Happy Days. That was like when I was growing up. And they, you know, like family stories, family adventure. Those are types of stories that I like to write also. Mysteries I'm getting into now. I'm trying to write a Hanukkah mystery story, a chapter book.
Hanukkah mystery.
I'm trying, I'm in the midst of it. So hopefully you'll hear more about that at some point.
The missing cradle.
Well, you know, along those lines, something along those lines. So I like to write what kinds of books I like to read, I think, as a kid. So I think your theory is true. Like whatever was in your life, maybe as a child, maybe that's how you express yourself, because we all have to kind of be kids as writers, because we have to get into the mindset of kids. And it's, you know, I do have 3 kids. My youngest is 15, so she's not little anymore, but I still have, you know, memories of when they were little. I have little nieces and nephews, nephews, and little cousins. And, you know, I like to, when I walk around New York, I often have a pen with me and a paper, and I write down snippets of conversations at the park, at the playground, at restaurants. I eavesdrop.
That's such good advice.
I do. I always either write on a piece of paper, like I carry a little pad, or I write on my phone, because you can always take out your phone and not look.
Yeah, you see, you're much younger than me. So like people my age forget that they have phones in their pockets.
Right. I write on my phone. You can like dictate on your phone if I see something.
I had an idea for a story like 2 months ago. And, you know, it was such a great idea. And I said, okay, I don't have to write this down.
Oh, yeah. Not good.
What happened?
Yeah, that's the worst. No, I write everything down. I'm a list maker in my life in general. I have a list for what I have to do today, because if I don't write something down, I'll really forget it. So I'm a big list maker anyway, but I have idea notebooks that I've had for years. And at least once a month, I would say I go back and I flip through my idea notebooks, because you never know what's in there. Sometimes I totally forget an idea that I had from last year. And then you can either like resuscitate it, or maybe you can mash it up with some other idea you had floating around. So I write them down, but then I actually go back and refer to them. And you sometimes realize, I was like, oh, I had that idea last year. That actually is interesting. Like now maybe is the time for it. Or now maybe like a spark of imagination came to me that I could think of about how I want to write it out. Because sometimes you have an idea, but you don't know how to, you know, write it out.
So I'm always talking to people at the beginning of their voyage. The only writers I can teach are the ones who are starting out. And then I find that they become very good, and then I have to find more beginners. What do you share? There's millions of people who want to write children's books,
Yeah,
and they think it's easy. So first of all, it's not easy to write
Correct.
a good story.
correct.
What other pieces of advice do you have for them?
Right. Okay, a couple of things, and I can break it down into like story ideas, and then maybe writing a first draft, and then maybe researching. So with story ideas, you know, as we know, you can get story ideas from anywhere. I tell people to mind their own life and mind their own family history. Think about their collections, like my snow globe collection. Think about their pets. My dog is a character in one of my books. Think about their family history. Think about their heirlooms. And for Sadie's Shabbat stories, which I'll talk about in a minute, I used heirlooms as a prompt. Look at old family photos. And now, especially in the pandemic, it would be really nice to maybe call some older relatives who you don't have a chance to see in person, and ask them about their life, like talk about their joys, their hardships, the kind of questions you're asking, Mel, like you're digging deep into like all the way back to the beginning. But you can ask that on a Zoom call with an older relative.
I would say I'm doing this for a living, but nobody's paying me.
Correct. Right. So, but especially now during a pandemic, like interview your relatives. You never know what stories are there. And then just observe your world and just look out your window, like no matter where you live. Like I'm looking out my window now when I'm talking to you, and there are buildings and there are apartments, and it's like Rear Window, the Alfred Hitchcock movie. And I love Alfred Hitchcock. Like you're just looking into people's lives, and maybe there's a story there somewhere. So just observe in your world and think about a story idea, and then write it down, and then go back, as I said, go back and look at all your ideas and maybe put two together. Two ideas that wouldn't even necessarily match, put them together. Exactly, like mash them up and you might have an idea.
This is what I've been teaching for years.
Hmm.
That creative people, what they do is they don't think outside the box, they connect boxes.
Yeah, you're connecting the dots.
That's to take two things
I like
that don't
that.
appear that they should be connected.
Yeah,
That is what makes a good invention, a good story, a good children's book. Bravo. What
I,
else?
I think E.M. Forster said only connect. Like it's all about connecting. Like my philosophy is connecting with people, connecting stories. Just right. We're all. I think as a storyteller, we're trying to connect. We're connecting to readers. We're connecting to other writers. Like that's what we're doing
Good.
basically.
So
So,
for years, when I decided to take this more seriously, there were years when I didn't read children's books
yeah,
because I was afraid that either people had the same idea as me or that I would riff on somebody else's idea.
yeah, I understand that.
It's a big mistake, right?
It's a big mistake. I read so much in my genre, usually, mostly picture books, some and also chapter books. I try to get my hands on all the new picture books. I look at lists of award winners and I read those award winners. I might do an author study like a Vivian Kirkfield's. I have and I've read all her books. And you can look, these become mentor texts and you learn from them because your story is your own. Like you're not going to, I understand the fear that you don't want to use someone else's story and you don't want to copy an idea or you don't want to copy a voice, but you really can't copy someone's voice. Like your voice is your own. And there are lots of ideas, there are lots of ideas, but the way you tell a story is unique to you. Like we all have to tell our own unique, special stories. So you really have to read these mentor texts to learn from people like who've done it before. Like people go to museums and copy old masters. They're not going to copy them to learn. They're copying them to gain experience and to understand what was done before, and then to put their own unique spin in the future on that kind of work. So yeah, you have to read very widely. That's a huge tip. And study the books. Sometimes I write out the text of a book, of a picture book, because they're short. They're under 500 words. So I write out or I type out the words, and then I look at the words without the pictures just to see how did the author actually formulate those words. Are there puns? Is there wordplay? Is there alliteration? What are the images? And you can learn a lot by just looking at the words, even without the illustrations. So that's a tip. Then of course, I always tell people just write a first draft, just get it written. It doesn't have to be right. It just has to be written. And you get it down and then you go back and revise. And for me, I write in a lot of drafts, a lot of iterations, and I really also rely on critique partners. And I tell people, find your peeps, find your people, find your critique groups. I have lots of different critique groups. I have one critique group just for my Jewish stories. I have a critique group for board books. I have a critique group for chapter books. I have my very valued and trusted main group of critique partners that I go to for everything. And not only writing, we talk about rejections. We talk about how to keep yourself going in the face of rejection, how to keep writing in a pandemic, how to launch a book in a pandemic.
So Melissa, are we masochists?
It's tough. I mean, you have to have a thick skin because you do get a lot of rejections. But I think if you're a writer, you want to write. That's what you want to do.
I can't help it. You see, I put it off for so many years.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like I wouldn't say it's like a disease, but it's something that itches you all the time.
Right. You have ideas, you have stories, and I can see
the story is an itch, and then you scratch it. Does this happen to you? That you have this great idea? I have a great idea. I have the best idea. I'm going to get home. I'm going to write it out, and then you write your first draft, and it sucks.
Totally, 100%. My first drafts are never good. Never. I never had something that was good. And I'm the type of person in everything that I write, whether it's a presentation or anything. I work in a lot of drafts, but I just like to get it down on the page because for me, getting it down solidifies it in my mind. And it's like the act of writing that gets it down on the page. And then I go back and revise. And that's where the writing happens for me in the revision. I just go through so many drafts before I even send it to critique partners. I just keep revising and revising. You could always change either the plot or the structure or the tone, or then you get into the weeds with each individual word. I can always revise. And I always tell people, here's one more tip. I tell people to put a mission statement, like a pitch at the top of each draft. I do that. I keep a pitch at the top of each of my stories because sometimes you kind of forget what you're writing about and it goes in a different direction. And that's fine if it's intentional, and then you can change your pitch. But sometimes you realize, like, I'm not really saying what I want to say. Like, the theme that I thought I was putting in here really isn't in here. And I need to go back and look at my pitch and make sure that I'm on the right track, or I'm not writing two stories at once, or I'm not deviating and losing the point. So, you know, if you need to change the pitch, of course, like, it flows. And sometimes my stories change from the beginning, but I like to keep something at the top of each story so I know, like, where I'm going, kind of.
At the end of the day, you have to be able to describe your story in one sentence.
Correct. Exactly. Otherwise, you don't know it.
So now's a good time to brag about your new stuff.
Okay, so I'll tell you about Sadie's Shabbat Stories, which just came out in October. And the illustrator is Lisa Goldberg, and she is absolutely amazing. She brought her unique vision to this story, and you'll see, I'll show you some pages, so some illustrations. So this story is about Sadie, who loves to bake challah with her grandmother, her Nana, every week. And as they're preparing for Shabbat, which is, as you know, which is the Jewish Sabbath, and you use, it's every week, and you use certain ritual objects to help you prepare for Shabbat. So you have a challah bread, and you cover it with a certain challah cover, and you have candlesticks to help you say the blessings, and you have a Kiddush cup to either use and enjoy with wine or grape juice for the kids. So Sadie loves to prepare Shabbat with her grandma, her Nana, and every week Nana tells her different stories about these ritual objects and how they relate to the relatives, the ancestors in Sadie's life. And every week Sadie says, Nana, can you tell me the story over and over again? So you see, that's reminiscent of me, how I asked my Nana to tell me stories. So I kind of poured my heart into this one. And through the stories, we learn about Sadie's ancestors. And this story really is special to me. It's like a story of my heart, because I used anecdotes and vignettes from my own family life to write the story. So the first story is about my father, and it's a true story. And it's about how my father was born in New York, in Brooklyn, in 1912. And he was a lot older than my mom. He was 20 years older than my mom, by the way. He was a lawyer, and his client was my mom's aunt. My mom was 17 when she met him, or I think 19 maybe, and he was her aunt's lawyer. But anyway, so he was born in 1912, and in Brooklyn, and his mother wanted to take him back to meet her parents when he was about 1 year old in Europe. And the timing was horrible because they went back in 1913, and then they got stuck in Europe for almost 10 years when World War I broke out. His father remained in New York, and he and his mom were in Europe with his grandparents, and they finally made it back on a ship, the Leopoldina, back to New York. But he told me this story over and over again about how he lived, you know, with his cousins and his grandparents for almost 10 years without his dad. So that became one story. And then another story in the book. And then another story that I always heard was the story that my husband's grandfather told about when he was a young boy. He grew up in Russia, in Odessa. And he escaped from Russia in about 1916 at the time of pogroms, violence against Jewish people in Russia. And he couldn't take anything with him. He and his younger brother, they were teenagers, came to America, and they never saw their parents again. They came with like a knapsack and a lunch, you know, they took a train and a boat and like a wagon ride, and they finally made it to America. So these stories like really touched me and stuck with me. And I put them in the context. It took me a while to figure out how to write them, but I put them in the context of Sadie celebrating Shabbat with her Nana and asking her Nana to tell these stories. So here's the first story. Here's the first story. That was my father's story. And you want me to read one little bit of it? It
Of
says,
course.
the year was Nana pulled Sadie close. The year was 1913. When Grandpa was a little boy, he and his mother visited his grandparents in Europe. And then the borders closed and they got stuck. For 6 long years, they couldn't return to New York. Finally, it was safe to leave. Great grandma wrapped her mother's candlesticks in a tablecloth and packed them in a suitcase. For weeks, they rode by wagon, boat, and train. Great grandpa waited patiently at the dock, arms wide open in welcome. Now those traveling candlesticks hold our Shabbat candles. And I love this image of Lisa's illustration, which is magnificent, of the grandpa waiting with his arms open wide for the boat to arrive. And this was, you know, the old Europe. And I know that Lisa did a tremendous amount of research about the architecture and the clothes and the customs and what people look like. And then her art was inspired by Chagall. So here's Sadie imagining the dancing relatives with the candlesticks, which is so evocative and emotional. And she just did such an amazing job. And here's the story about my husband's grandfather. And I love here how he finally makes it to America. There he is, and there's his brother, and there in the lighter tones are the relatives they left behind. So it's really touching. And even though I wrote the story, I have to say, every time I read the story and read it to the end, like I have tears in my eyes, even though I know it's going to happen and I wrote it. Just the way Lisa illustrated and the way it all came together was just beautiful. And I'll show you one page that's special. Oh, here's the last story about the challah cover, and it's all the Jewish weddings, that we've all been to. The grandma giving the bride the challah cover as a wedding gift. And I'll just show you one Chagall inspired page that I really love, which is here. You see, and Lisa put in also a secondary storyline with a dove and a dog. So on each page, the reader can look for a cat. I'm sorry, a dove and a cat. So on each page, the reader can look for the dove and the cat. And basically the themes here are family connections and thinking about the heirlooms that you are passed down, like door to door, generation to generation, what heirlooms are in your family. And it's also girl power though, because it's about Sadie, who learns how to tell her own unique stories. And she spends all this time listening to Nana's stories, and her greatest wish is to tell stories just like Nana. And I'm not going to spoil the end, but my theme and my idea was that young girls and everybody should be able to use their voice. And when I go to schools and I talk to students, I say, like, whether your voice is big or small, quiet or loud, whether you express yourself in writing or song or sports or whatever, learn how to use your voice. So I'm really big on that. Kids and people, like, using our voices, like healing the world, making the world a better place, but use your voice. And that's basically the theme of the story. So I'm really so happy with the way it came out. And Lisa was just amazing.
And I wish you a lot of luck with it.
Thank you.
May you be so blessed that the PJ Library takes it on.
I know. I love PJ Library. It's so funny because once I was on a committee.
Well, let's be hopeful. Let's be hopeful that they take it.
Let's be hopeful. Thank you, Mel. I love they're a great group. So that would be amazing.
And so, like, we're nearing the end of this wonderful Mel Meets Mel.
Mel Meets Mel. I love that.
And I'm going to ask you about the Beatles.
I figured you would. And I'm the worst singer. I'm actually like the worst. I wish I had a magic song box or something that would make me a good singer, but
I think maybe that's your next story.
I know. I always wanted to be a good singer. You can't be everything.
You're a generation younger than me. So do you like the Beatles?
I do. I love the Beatles. I watched that movie yesterday. Did you see that movie? It was multiple
times. You know that today is the 40th anniversary.
I know. I saw that of John Lennon. I know. I saw that. And it's so, I don't know if you've been to New York and you've seen the Imagine it's like Circle in Strawberry Field, the mosaic. It's just magnificent. And whenever you go there.
But every time I'm in Central Park, I look over to the Dakota buildings.
I know. Next time, visit this mosaic, because last time I was there, I walk around Central Park a lot and people are there singing his songs and just dedicating their time to singing his songs. It's amazing. It's like a moment of community. But I did imagine this morning. Imagine the Imagine mosaic.
Yeah, and that movie is incredible because
yeah, I loved it.
The idea of the movie is incredible. Some of the way they do it is a little bit, but the whole idea. What would the world be like without the Beatles?
I know, it was great. Yeah, so I'm a big fan, and I kind of knew you were going to ask me this question. Although I hope you're not going to make me sing, but I do have an answer for what I really love all the songs. Honestly,
I'm not going to make you sing, but I am going to persuade you to sing.
Right. I really love I Want to Hold Your Hands. Yesterday, I love so many of their songs, but one of my favorite songs is Here Comes the Sun. And I thought it was kind of appropriate now as we're getting into winter and the pandemic and we're hoping to see the sun again. So I think that's one of my favorite songs. And I'm generally an optimistic person. I like to laugh. I like to find the good in everything and find the good in people. So I'm giving you Here Comes the Sun.
You seem like an incredible person, and people who write stories for children usually are.
Thank you. I do. I feel like it's the nicest community I've ever met, this kidlit community, like you, how generous to be interviewing people and spotlighting us and highlighting our books.
I'm not generous. I want to learn.
Okay. Well, there's a generosity in that, in learning and teaching. So, but the kidlit community is amazing.
Yeah. So I'm now going to invoke this magic singing brush,
Right, right. Oh gosh.
and I'm going to persuade you that singing is your voice.
Will you
It
sing with
doesn't
me?
matter.
It's
Of
true.
course I will.
Will you sing a little? It's true. I tell people use their own voice, so it's true.
Yeah. I'm actually writing a story about that. So
Oh wow.
don't tell any, don't
I'm
tell
I,
anybody.
my lips are sealed. I'm not telling a soul. My lips are
Okay.
sealed.
So here comes the sun. You start.
Comes the sun. We're starting.
Little darling.
Okay. Little darling, it's been a cold, long, long, lonely winter. Do 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 do. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Do 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 do. Here comes the sun, and I say it's all right to do 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 boo do boo boo boo. Am I
That was
blushing?
marvelous.
Oh my God.
No,
I
listen,
really, I would not have done that for anyone but you. I just have to say that.
listen, Mel. If you had sung out of key, I would have said that your singing was beautiful. But you sung in key. Your singing is lovely. I don't have to bullshit.
Thank you. I appreciate that from Mel to
And,
Mel.
and no, and I didn't sing for 20 years because somebody insulted my singing.
I know. I know.
And I don't know whether this happened to you. Maybe I should give training courses.
I think so because you kind
Yeah.
of get people to go out of their
Everybody-
box here.
No, but you really sang beautifully.
Thank you. I'm going to listen to it back and like, oh, but thank you. No, I appreciate it. And I'm going to visit you when I'm next in Tel Aviv. It's literally one of my favorite cities. I love it.
And for some reason, I was on mute when you were singing. So just,
You
Um,
were. I heard that. I noticed that. I just kept going.
and that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
It's like riding a bicycle, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Until you figure out that nobody's behind you, and then you
That's
fall
right.
off.
That's right. So I
That was,
stopped.
it was beautiful. So listen, I will be delighted when you come visit me in Israel.
I'm
But
going. I love Tel
have,
Aviv.
I have this feeling that I'm going to see you in New York before you see me in Israel.
Okay, that would be great. The last time I was in Israel was 2018, and when the pandemic clears, I'll come again. We love it. We visited, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, the north, the south, Eilat, the Galilee area, Tiberias, Safad. I mean, we went all over on 3 different trips, and we absolutely love it. So we'll be back. But I hope you come to New York soon.
Yeah, and I want to do one of your things with the coffee and the writing.
Oh, that would be great.
And
Okay,
I want to do a thing with you at the Metropolitan Museum,
that would be amazing.
Which
Let's
I also-
definitely do that.
which I also love.
Fantastic. That's going to be a Mel and Mel date.
But I'm like there's some nice Van Goghs in the museum,
Yes.
and I'm more partial to them than Monet.
Okay.
You're not going to hold that against me, are you?
We're going to visit it all. We're going to see it all.
Melissa Stoller, this has been incredible.
It has been wonderful.
Take care of yourself. Tell mommy I want her on the show.
Oh, thank you. She'll watch and she'll definitely comment and she'll come on anytime. But it's been such a
Tell her
pleasure.
I'll bring the peanuts.
Okay. She'll bring the bagels.
Oh, I love bagels.
Me too. Who doesn't?
It's incredible meeting you, and thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, Mel. It's been
And,
a joy to talk with you. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Let's hope that your new book goes to PJ Library,
Thank
and
you.
let's hope that in 2021 we both find agents and
Cheers to
make a
that.
book sale. Make a book sale to Random House or one of those guys.
Cheers to that.
Okay, dear.
High five you. High five. Thank you so much, Mel. Cheers to that. And it has been a pleasure. Mel to
Bye.
Mel.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.